As we mentioned off the top, September 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We welcome Gary Parker. He's the Indigenous Lead at the Niagara Catholic District School Board. And Gary, you're an activist, you're a consultant, you're a drummer, very involved in the Indigenous community here in Niagara. I can't think of a better person to take the lead with the Niagara Catholic Board. Congratulations on your new post.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
This has been a very busy week for you, heading to September 30th. Can you tell me how Niagara Catholic is recognizing this day at some of the locations?
Well, a lot of our classes are doing some work with it. I mean, we're trying to reintroduce some new curriculum, some new resources for them to get used to rolling out in their classrooms. So that's one point of it. The other thing is we have partnering organizations and a lot of events happening in the Niagara region. Brock University has some great events happening. Some of our schools have been invited to participate in that. A big one that we're participating in is a walk. It's called a Unity Walk in the town of Fort Erie. The Fort Erie Native Friendship Center is putting it on, and we partnered with the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center to get some of our secondary students out there to engage and understand what this Unity Walk means. And they're going to walk right down the center of Garrison Road, and at they have a memorial garden for residential schools at the Fort Erie Native Friendship Center on Buffalo Road. That's where we'll end. We'll have a few speakers, and again, our students get to understand a little bit more of the impacts of residential school and understanding more of the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation.
It's important that we look at both of those words, truth and reconciliation. We can't have reconciliation without the truth. And for so long, our education system and just basically our knowledge of what happened over the 500 years that Indigenous people have been dealing with settlers, a lot of that has not been told to people who are non-Indigenous.
Yeah, the big part of that, again, is the truth. It's exactly what you just said there. I think for us to be able to share history from our lens, I think people will understand Indigenous people a lot better. There's a lot of inequities that are happening to this very day. And again, it's because they don't understand the Indigenous peoples. You know, we talk about some of the historical traumas, the historical underpinnings of what shaped us, who we are today, is directly from the residential schools. Another big part of that is the Indian Act. You know, and the Indian Act is what really enacted the residential schools. You know, so it got involved with, you know, private contractors and also the churches to roll out those residential schools, you know. So there's a lot of things that we need to talk about and unpack some of that hard stuff in history, and it needs to come from our lens as well.
It's important too that you're starting with the youngest ages of these kids in the school system. And you know, the way I look at it, if I wasn't taught it during my time in elementary school, high school, if I wasn't taught it, that's one thing. It's not too late for me to learn it as a much older man, but starting at that young age and getting the truth to these young children is so key to seeing a change eventually become part of everyday life.
Yeah, I totally agree, because again, when we reach out to the young students and start from a young age, and by the time they get into secondary, the talk and discussions around what happened in history becomes a little bit easier. Right now, a lot of people tiptoe around, you know, the discussions about residential schools, the impacts. We tend to shy away from words like racism, discrimination. People almost look at that as like, that's taboo. We shouldn't talk about it, you know, but we need to be more open and engage in those conversations, you know. And again, the truth of that is we need to be sharing our story. How did it affect the Indigenous communities? How did it affect the Indigenous people? Again, we share a lot of stories like we're a page out of history. No, we're alive. We're doing very well. A lot of people here.
History. You are right here.
Exactly.
And the history is right within you, and so much of your knowledge. And I mean, we look at the environment right now and consider how we treat the environment as a society versus how Indigenous communities traditionally look at the environment as the nurturer.
Exactly. That's part of our DNA. Prior to any colonizers coming to this land here, we lived off the land. So we had a great connection to nature. A lot of people look at us as environmentalists, and it's not really an environmentalist. It's our place in this world. Where do we live? You know, the resources that we have here are the resources we live off of, So again, we have to respect our place in nature, So again, a lot of our traditional teachings are embedded into those philosophies, So we still carry those to this day. A lot of people say, well, you become the environmentalist or the advocate for nature and the land. And yes, that is part of it, but it's because of our natural instincts of growing up off the land and having that relationship with all things in nature,
Your role with Niagara Catholic is really two-part. Your role is to educate the students about Indigenous history and Indigenous contact with the settlers and residential schools, but you're also an advocate for Indigenous students. And how do you handle that part of your role?
It takes a little bit of a balance, but I'm very excited about it because, again, we get to share from our lens, So I'm able to bring a lot different resources, So we get a lot. We have to decolonize. We have to unlearn things before we can move forward. So we have to take a lot of those histories and say, okay, that in fact didn't happen that way. Here's how it really happened. So again, we get to unpack a lot of that stuff there. So bringing in new resources, bringing in, some of our traditional speakers, some of our traditional elders, to share some of those real, true stories of what happened in residential schools, A lot of the survivors have great stories. I don't say great stories, but impactful stories, again, where we can learn from, And then the other side of that is to advocate, and we want to support our Indigenous students. When I went to the Catholic Board, I've identified our number one priority is our Indigenous students. So we need to provide support around them so they learn in an environment where there's no racism, no discrimination.
They have to feel comfortable in that learning environment.
Exactly. So again, if we want to lift them up to bring them up to where they need to be at as well, we need to put some support around them again. So we need to recognize that they're there in a part of the general public as well. Get some supports around them and give them what they need. But again, we want to be reflective in the education. So again, you walk into a school, we want it to be inviting. They might want to see some Indigenous images, some of our community faces where we're going into the schools and things like that. So they feel it's a safe place, And then beyond that, we want to educate the non-Indigenous people again. So again, there's a couple of priorities that we do have, and we're starting to unpack those things right away.
Are you seeing a change? Are you seeing these young students with Indigenous heritage, are you seeing them becoming a little bit more respected, a little bit more accepted amongst their peers and maybe valued for what their history brings?
I think in my time, in my lifetime, we've seen a lot of progressive steps. When I grew up in school, it's a night and day type experience. I'd like to continue that legacy of change and saying, okay, for a student now, I'd like for them to be, when they're older, to say, yeah, things have changed extremely well. Again, so we want to continue the momentum on educating and talking to people about Indigenous issues. There's a lot of issues right now that are alive, and I don't want to say, again, well, but there's some real things that are happening that Canadians need to learn about,
September 30th is just one day, that National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. How should the average person, move forward from that day with the knowledge about the reconciliation that needs to be done?
I talk about trying to build relationships. So if any Canadian is around to get involved with the Indigenous communities, they have a powwow in St. Catharines, engage in that. Get to learn a little bit more of our history, our culture, our song, our dances, to just be involved in it. There's a lot of community activity around it. We have some friendship centers. We have some community-based organizations to get involved with them. If they have questions around, different issues that are going on, reach out and speak to them. I know a lot of people, not just in our schools, but a lot of people are asking questions about things, and they say, we just don't know how to go about doing it. I also say to take that step out of that little, people tend to get in their little safe zones, and I say, you got to take a step out of that little safe zone and say, okay, we want to learn a little bit more. And it's hard sometimes to take that step and say, I never knew history that way. We learned it a different way. So it's eye-opening for a lot of people, and some people are hurt by that because they say, You know, we never knew this happened in Canadian history. We were never taught it, you know. And it's safe to say that, but again, to take that step out there to learn about it, relearn about it, you know.
Gary, I understand your role also brings you in as a consultant with something called Soaring Eagles School. What is that?
So Soaring Eagles is a re-engagement program with the Catholic School Board, and a lot of the work that they're doing there is through a cultural lens. You know, we have Indigenous teachers there and supports there. We have a partnership with the Niagara Regional Native Center to have a resource person there that can bring in speakers. We can offer some traditional teachings. But because it's a re-engagement program, where we offer it to students who are, you know, maybe struggling in the mainstream a little bit.
Right.
And we bring them there to give them a little bit more of a hands-on support and help them, you know, understand the culture a little bit more. Because again, our identity, we always talk about our identity. We want to bring that up a little bit. And again, it's that re-engagement to help them get back into integration, back into another school, you know. So that's the concept about it. What's great about it is, again, it's out in the land. And we've partnered with the Conservation Authority there, so it's on a really beautiful site. And we're able to do stuff like what we call land-based learning. Takes us out of the conventional institutional way of learning in a classroom, and I always call it institution green rooms,
Yes.
you know, and get out of that and to learn right on the land and learn the way we traditionally learn. And the children and students who are in those programs really flourish, and it's a great program. It's a really wonderful
Sounds
program
fantastic.
to be part of. Yeah.
Gary, I have to say that I do believe that both school boards, the DSBN and Niagara Catholic, are doing a wonderful job in helping this next generation of students learn what needs to be learned for truth and reconciliation. And, you know, congratulations on your role with Niagara Catholic. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.